as the struggle continues with low oil prices, the government attempts to boost non-oil revenues, flash floods destroy thousands of homes, and the COVID-19 restrictions to be eased in the country. These are some of the stories that are making headlines, and we had a conversation to political and economic analyst Akol Dok for more.
Thank you for having me. The economic situation in South Sudan has been hurt by two things: COVID-19 and the falling oil prices. The falling oil prices has hurt the government's key revenue source, and that's crude oil exports. And due to COVID-19, the country is not producing as much output as it was before the pandemic. And this pandemic has caused the economy to shut down slightly. Right now, neighboring countries such as Kenya and Uganda are still having partial shutdown. And the fall in oil prices is hurting hard currency reserves in the country. The central bank has complained of low hard currency reserves due to low oil prices, and there's food prices in the market have skyrocketed. So the economic situation is similar to what the whole world is experiencing due to the pandemic.
President Salva Kiir called for an immediate economic crisis committee. What should we really expect from this meeting?
Well, what we can expect is recommendations to diversify the economy and to look at ways to get government revenue outside of oil. The country has been dependent on oil. It hasn't really been focused on non-oil revenue. Right now, what the president wants is he wants to identify ways to streamline revenue collection through the National Revenue Authority, through taxation, through customs and tariffs, and identify ways to ensure that the government is getting the money that it direly needs. The government was relying on crude oil for a majority of its hard currency and also for government revenue. But now what we can expect is recommendations that are going to push the president and push people within the senior leadership to look at ways to diversify the economy, look into ways to invest in gold, invest in agriculture, invest in fisheries, and also make recommendations on ways that the country could streamline revenue collection.
Touched on the fact that the government is trying to look for alternative ways other than depending on non-oil revenues. And you've just touched on some of the sectors, including mining sector as well as agriculture sector. Just what is the current performance of these sectors when you look at the country's GDP? And other than the recommendation, what needs to actually be done in order to spur economic activities in this particular sector, most especially agriculture?
Well, these sectors have been hurt due to conflict. Conflict and insecurity have halted people from farming. I'll start with the mining sector. South Sudan has great mining potential, especially in the eastern Equatoria area, in the southeast corner of the country. It has great mining potential. The central bank right now is actually buying gold from artisanal miners. So that's the thing. The agriculture sector is by far the sector with the most potential in South Sudan. South Sudan has vast potential to grow crops such as sorghum, sesame, sugarcane, cotton, fruits, rice. But what it needs is it needs financing and it needs support from the government. A lot of small farmers, they farm for low-scale subsistence farming. They farm to feed themselves and their families. What the country should be focused on is how can the country ensure that it no longer imports food? Because right now, South Sudan is importing sugar, it's importing wheat, it's importing different food items from neighboring countries. So these sectors, what they need is they need critical support. They need support from financing the sector, maybe food subsidies if necessary, and also the possibility of increasing tariffs on imports coming from other countries to discourage people from importing food and encourage people to farm. The agriculture sector by far has the most potential because unlike crude oil with gold, you can eat your produce and they can reduce hunger, especially as the population is coming back from post-conflict.
The investments are looking like, most especially into the agriculture sector, since you said it's one of the crucial areas that needs focus on. Are we seeing private investors coming in? Are we seeing also FDIs coming into the country in that sector?
Yes, right now the Ministry of Agriculture is in talks with different private investors and banks to facilitate loan facilities, FDIs, and also partnerships when people are interested in working on large-scale agriculture projects. Now, these large-scale agriculture projects will involve the central government, the local governments, and also the local communities. And they wanted to develop mechanisms where South Sudan can, one, feed itself, and two, the surplus it receives, export it to neighboring countries. Ethiopia is a country that neighbors South Sudan, is the second most populated country in Africa, and itself is in need of food. So South Sudan can feed countries such as Ethiopia. It can feed countries such as Congo. So what the focus now is how can we get investment and develop a sustainable model where first of all we can feed ourselves, no longer rely on these imports of food. Second, start generating hard currency from the food, decreasing our reliance on oil and diversifying the economy a little bit, which is also mitigates our risk.
You've seen some parts of the country have been suffering from flash floods. When you look at the impact that this is having on the agriculture per se, as well as the population, and what is being done in order to ease the effects from the floods?
The floods are hurting rural communities, and this is going to hurt rural agriculture. A lot of communities, the rural parts of South Sudan, especially parts of Jonglei and Upper Nile, they farm. They're farmers, and the floods have displaced them. So they're no longer living in the rural areas and the villages. They've come to towns. They've come to places that are safe from the floods. This is going to affect the local production. And the mitigation tactics is one. The government is looking at ways to develop dikes, looking at ways to mitigate the water that's coming in, and also preventative measures. These preventative measures is to develop strategies that in the future, should they anticipate high rainfall or floods, they can relocate people or develop ways to contain the water. So the solution now is the government is working with the state governments and international organizations to help displaced people, provide them humanitarian assistance, but also think of ways to encourage more people in the communities to farm so they can provide for themselves.
Yes, we've seen the government has also indicated that they will be easing the measures that were put forward to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. In your own words, would you say that this is actually the right time and they have the right capacity to actually mitigate the spread of the virus within the country?
I think the dangers of COVID are twofold. It's a double-edged sword. Number one, if you continue to lock down the country, a lot of people who make their livelihood, people who do small work in shops, small-scale businesses, they can't afford to stay home for 30 days. They live their life day by day. But when the country is facing such harsh economic conditions, it believes that by opening up the economy, it's better to mitigate the risk of COVID than mitigate the risk of hunger or low economic output. As you see what's happened globally around the world with many countries is they have to find a balance between opening up the economy and the health of their citizens.